So, my previous landlord almost killed me and my partner like 4 or 5 times. We're in a better situation now, and we have a different landlady, and she's super awesome. But yeah, our last place was not super awesome. It was super bad, and it was super overpriced, and there was all these mysterious fees that kept coming up each month, and it'd be going months without repairs. So like our shower was flooding, and like there was all these other problems, and the people in charge just treated us super nasty. And the worst part is there's this huge problem with the building literally leaking carbon monoxide into our apartment. And if you don't know, carbon monoxide is this invisible, odorless gas that's so lethal, it can just kill you in your sleep if you don't catch it. And there's just so many instances of this happening, and on nights when our alarms went off, it was reading like in the lethal ranges every time. So because we didn't have the means to move, we just kind of stuck it out for a bit. But let's just say things were handled very dubiously, and we got many visits from the firefighters. So because of all that mess, my partner and I spent a lot of time over those few years writing lots and lots of emails, and then being gaslit, and then writing more emails. And at the end of last year, things started going a bit too far, and we finally got out of there. And that frustration and stress, it like needed a way out. So I made a comic. Woo! But yeah, the back and forth feeling of being hunched over your laptop and typing out an angry email just to tone it back to be polite. And like, you're wanting to make a point, but then you also want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And you don't want to get completely taken advantage of either. So all those kind of feelings and ideas are what I baked into my comic. The characters Pookie and Worm channel all their bitterness into crafting a spell potion that will like give their terrible landlord a piece of their minds. But they have this dark spell book, and it kind of speaks doubt and reason to them. And as the doubt slips in, Pookie isn't sure if they're willing to go through with it anymore. So it's kind of like me and my partner when we were writing the emails. It was like, oh, we should say that, and oh no, that's not nice, let's tone it back, and blah blah blah. And like, it's just this back and forth of wanting to stand up for yourself and balancing that with like, am I being too angry, or like, am I being too nice, should I be stronger, and those kind of things. So talking about like turning a personal story into a fictional story or like a comic or something, there's a million ways that you could tell a story, and it's up to you to decide what works best for what you're trying to say. So here's a few things that you could think about to dial in the tone and style of your story. Literal versus abstract, plot versus character, and call to action versus entertainment. I'm not saying that your story has to be either or, like one of these things, but thinking about where it lands on these spectrums might help give you the tent poles you need to guide your decision making during the process. And they're just kind of some things that I was thinking about while I was making this comic. So for literal versus abstract, it's like adjusting the focus on your camera, but with the message of your story. So like if it's a bit blurry and you're being more abstract and open-ended or symbolic with how you get your message across, it might not be clear to everyone what you mean to say. But this could be really impactful for people who do understand, and they could feel seen on a level that can only be expressed through your artwork. For a more literal and realistic approach, it's like an image that's super sharp in focus, like a super factual essay or a nonfiction biography. The story is crisp and clear without much room for interpretation. Most art, I would say, falls between somewhere in the gray area. It's not life, and it's not trying to be. It might be inspired by real things in the creator's life, but it isn't a one-to-one. And usually there's some kind of core message the story is trying to get across. My favorite stories don't hammer you over the head with its message, but the story is still clear enough that you're able to follow what's going on. So how do you do something like that? Well, to start off, for Pookie and Worm, I took my personal experience and I pulled it out of the context of real life, and I set it in a fictional setting. So it's not real people, it's not like historically accurate at all, but I'm just like taking it away so it's not just my literal story. my real experience is long and complicated with many events. And instead of trying to fit all of that in there, I picked just like one feeling that stood out to me. Something that I can make an analogy for. Like trying to stand up to my landlord by sending an email turns into trying to stand up to the Lord of the Land by brewing a potion. I can draw connections between the types of characters and types of feelings that arise in the real life situation, and then paint them onto my fictional characters. At this point, I'm not telling a story about me anymore. I'm telling a story about my characters, which leads into plot versus character. You've probably heard of The Hero's Journey or the book Save the Cat, which give you all these fantastic resources to chart out the plot of your story like a formula. Although these methods are really useful, leaning on them too heavily might drive you into the plot-driven end of the spectrum. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, it's just as long as it's intentional. On the opposite end, you can write a story and someone might argue that nothing really happens in your story at all. But it's all about the character dynamics, and that's cool too, as long as it's done with a purpose. Like before, most stories exist in a gray area here. You can have the most lovable characters in a simple, plot-driven story, or you can have a less structured, organic story where we follow along on these wild adventures wherever the characters' decisions take us. Knowing where your story lives on the spectrum helps you solve story problems as they arise. In a primarily plot-driven story, you might want to refer back to the story structure that you picked to find answers. You need to figure out how to get your characters from point A to point B. In a character-driven story, you might ask yourself, what would this character do in response to this thing? Maybe you can use things out of the character's control to put them in a situation where they'd react in an interesting way. Something I've heard a lot is character is king. So, no matter where your story falls on the spectrum, if there's something very specific and true about your character, people will cling on to that and love them, and it will get you very far. Lastly, every story has a purpose. Why did you spend all this time making this thing, and what are you trying to say? Is it a call to action, trying to get people to learn something or change the way they think about something? Or is it purely for entertainment, just to make people smile, feel a rush of adrenaline, or forget their worries? Surprise, surprise, this too is a spectrum. Many of the best stories are able to achieve both of these things, and that's how they cement themselves into people's hearts. Finding the seed that is the purpose of your story is crucial. If you have something to say, and you want to say it clear and loud, then it's super important to let that purpose guide you. If your story starts to meander away from your intentions, it's a good gut check to compare if what you're doing serves the main purpose of your creation. Don't let this freeze you up though. If you aren't confident in knowing what your story's purpose is yet, find something else to be your anchor. Make a choice, and be looking for when things fall into place. Sometimes you might find that a story's purpose arises accidentally, especially for a light, fun story that might not seem like there's any deeper message. Figuring out why you're making something can help you hone in on your story, and also to have the confidence to see it through. And sometimes making something for yourself is reason enough. People are so wonderful and complex. Even if you make something purely for your own enjoyment, your voice has a way to shine through. A purpose isn't always a moral or a lesson. It could be, I'm making this comic to prove to myself that I can do it. Or, I'm doing this to practice and learn. It could be, I'm doing this to make my friends laugh, or to make me laugh. You might make something that helps people feel seen, or as a way to connect with others. It could be that you really like horses and you just want to draw horses a lot. At the end of the day, your purpose can be anything. And honestly, it can and should be multiple things. Knowing and being intentional with the reasons why you're making something can be the greatest tool to helping you find success, in whatever success means for your own project. Now get out there and thumbnail something. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to read Pookie and Worm Hexter Landlord or support any of my other comics, please check out my website, alyssaragni.com, or click the link in the description. Stay tuned for my next video where I'll talk about drawing fast and dive into my thumbnail process. What are some other topics that you'd like to hear about? Comment your suggestions below. And with that, I'll see you next time. Bye!